perspective presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow. Hello again, folks. I'm Harry Greenberger. I host this show and welcome you here for today. My guest today is Dr. Cartherine Wessinger, who was referred to me by a mutual friend. And Dr. Wessinger, I appreciate your accepting my invitation to appear.
I'm happy to be
here. And I know we've got a lot to talk about. But I want to tell you folks something about who Dr. Wessinger is. She is a professor of history of religions at Loyola University, New Orleans. She's co-director of the Loyola Himalaya Adventure summer study in Dharamsala, India program, in which she teaches Tibetan and Indian religions. Since 2000, Dr. Wessinger has served as co-general editor of Nova Religio, the Journal of Alternative and Emergent Religions, published by the University of California Press. Her articles in journals and chapters in edited books include History of Religions and Theoretical Treatments of Women and Religion, Millennialism, New Religious Movements, and Religion and Violence. Dr. Wessinger has published 8 books, and if we have some time in the program, I might want to ask you about some of the books.
Certainly. But
I do want to tell you what courses Dr. Wessinger has taught. Introduction to World Religions, Contemporary Issues and Conflicts in World Religions, Women in World Religions, Women in Religions and Cultures, Women in Christianity, Hindu Paths to God, Buddhism, Tibetan and Indian religions, Religions of Asia, Religion and Media, which I find very interesting, Religious Responses to Disaster, Millennium Seminar, Fundamentals of Conflict and Peace, and New Orleans Religions Before and After Katrina. So now that our folks know who you are, and I'm sure that you know who we are secular, we're non-religious. That does not mean that we're really, our problem is churches, not religious people, all right? But when I went to your website, one of your websites, I think, there was a quotation at the very top which read, "The main idea behind religion is that it is full of doors and windows, and much commerce passes between the two sides. Words and people pass through those invisible doors, and the world is full of places and occasions that are like windows to the other side." Could you explain and elaborate on that for me?
Certainly. That quotation is from a colleague and a friend of mine, Robert Elwood, and he is a historian of religions who I believe has a lot of insight into religions and the study of religion as a scholarly endeavor. And what I tell my students is that 99% of the world's religions are the religions of the world. have a belief that there is an unseen dimension to life, an unseen reality, which is perhaps even more important than what we experience here in the material reality. And so for people in 99% of the world's religions, it's very important to be in harmony with the forces and the beings, or maybe perhaps a singular being like God in the monotheistic religions. It's important to be in harmony with those unseen personalities and forces in order to experience well-being here in our earthly life. But I want to say, notice I said that 99% of the world's religions. Okay. So I define religion very broadly, and so there are some movements that if I wanted to, I could that are secular, that I could study as religion because of the broad definition of religion that I use. So not all religions believe in an unseen dimension.
Well, when you're talking about including secular,
Mm-hmm.
I recently had as a guest on here one of the professors at Notre Dame Seminary,
Mm-hmm.
who in his Times-Picayune article treated secularism as a belief.
Yes.
And I explained to him that secularism is a conclusion, not a belief. I do not believe that there is no supernatural being. I have come to that conclusion based on the fact that I could find no evidence to support such a proposition.
Sure.
So when you say that you can see some secular religion, what does that mean?
Well, what I have in mind particularly, but we could push this even further, but what I'm thinking about are the Marxist revolutions. You know, Marxism, and we're going to talk about millennialism today, I think.
That's what we're going to talk about.
Well, Marxism is a secular millennial movement, and it has a worldview, and it has a goal that falls within the general definition of millennialism. But there's no belief in this unseen reality that you started out the program pointing to, you know,
Okay.
based on that quotation on my website. And so the different Marxist revolutions, and I'll just say that I think Marxism is very valuable in the economic analysis. You know, I've picked up a lot of that analysis through my reading of anthropologists.
When you say economic analysis of
Of the
relation to religion?
No, of the relations between human beings.
Oh,
So that when you're looking at the causes and the dynamics of inequalities in societies, you know, that Marxist analysis is very valuable, in my opinion. But
it did, however, fail because.
Well, but that's because it was a millennial movement, and every millennial movement has failed to create a perfect collective salvation.
All right. Now,
Okay.
I'm going to acknowledge up front, I know very little about millennialism, but I want to clarify one thing in my head.
Sure.
Millennium is a 1,000-year period.
Correct.
Is that 1,000 years dating from the birth of Christ, or is it 1,000 years dating from the day that Christ his second coming? Which 1,000 years is the millennium?
Well, scholars, those of us who are historians of religions, and also a number of anthropologists and so forth, we use this term millennialism, and yes, we get it from the word millennium, which means 1,000 years. And so what has become a scholarly term derives from the book of Revelation, the last book in the New Testament. And there it says that, you know, when Christ comes again and I think finally defeats Satan, I think Satan's thrown into a lake of fire, that Christ's reign on earth will last 1,000 years.
And is that the millennium that we're talking about?
Well, no. The scholars who study these phenomena, we've taken that term millennialism, to define it very much more broadly, to refer to belief that there will be an imminent transition to a collective salvation.
To what?
To a collective salvation, a salvation for a group of people, and it might be a salvation for a group of people here on earth, or it might be a salvation for a group of people in heaven. But it's not millennialism is aiming for some sort of salvation, or in other words, some sort of state of perfect well-being for a whole group of people. It's not just one person going to heaven at a time. It's for a whole group.
All right, but when you use the word imminent, imminent now, it could happen today or tomorrow.
Well,
I mean, are we in a 1,000-year period right now, or will it start when something else happens?
Well, different millennialists have different beliefs on this, but I would just recommend not get so hung up on the special dates, and don't get so hung up on the concept of 1,000 years, because when the year 2000 was coming around, and a lot of people, particularly Christians, but others as well, they were expecting that the year 2000 would mark an imminent transition to some kind of
collective. Because it'll be 1,000 years from the birth of Christ.
Well, it was going to be purportedly 2,000 years.
I mean, 2,000 years.
Well, no one knows when Jesus was born, but he was probably born somewhere between 6 and 4 BCE. So it's the Christian calendar is not perfect.
But when the calendar flipped over to 2000,
right,
there were people who saw that as some kind of an imminent sign of something.
Some did, a lot did, but then of course here we are at 2014. Nothing happened.
Nothing has happened.
And so I describe millennialism as an audacious hope, that it's an audacious human hope that a collective salvation will be created, that all the suffering of human existence will finally be resolved. Again, it might be an earthly salvation for a group of people, or it might be some sort of condition in some sort of heavenly realm. One thing I want to add to this definition of millennialism that I've given you, there's several common patterns that we see as scholars, and they're cross-cultural. And so one is what I call catastrophic millennialism, and that's belief that the world that we live in right now is so evil, so sinful, that all that can be done is to destroy it. Usually God will destroy it violently. And then this new millennial kingdom, what I call the millennial kingdom, will be created. Another type of millennialism, very common pattern, is what I call progressive millennialism. Progressive millennialists believe that human beings working according to the plan of either a divine or a superhuman agent can improve society and build the millennial kingdom here on earth. So for instance, I was just reading in the newspaper that Hillary Clinton recently spoke to the Methodist Women's Organization, and of course she's a Methodist, and she was talking about how the social gospel, as it's been preached by the Methodist Church and other Protestant churches, has inspired her in terms of her political work to try to make society better. That's the social gospel, okay?
All right.
And
well, politicians use religion to get votes.
They do.
So,
There's that also.
I like Hillary Clinton, but I suspect that was part of that motive.
I don't dispute that.
But now let me ask you, because I know so little about this subject, but I hear a lot over the years about the apocalypse. How does that tie into millennialism?
Well, the last book in the New Testament that we in English call Revelation, in Greek the title is Apocalypse. It's the Apocalypse of St. John, I think.
All right.
And so Revelation is just an English translation of this word apocalypse. And the vision in the book of Revelation is very catastrophic. So I use apocalypticism as a synonym for catastrophic millennialism.
Well, over the years, there have been one after another prediction of the apocalypse.
Yes.
Did they think that then was the end or the beginning of a 1,000-year period, or what was that all about, and where did they get their justification, and then how do people feel about the fact that the world didn't come to an end?
Well, if you read the book of Revelation, it's a very confusing book, because it's very symbolic. It's very dreamlike, and so any number of Christians who want to take it literally, and many don't take it literally, but the ones who want to take it literally, if you start to sort through it, or they claim they're taking it literally, you can pull out all sorts of different interpretations. And so, everybody has their own approach to, and then occasionally you'll have somebody who will set a date and say this is the time when the second coming will occur and the catastrophic destruction and the judgment of everyone. And if you strongly believe that, then it's very important to go out and convert people so that their souls will be saved.
All right,
from their
but now this
perspective.
is a Christian belief.
That's a Christian belief, but
It's not, it isn't. I mean, the Hebrew or the other religions. That's not their apocalypse. That's a Christian.
well, apocalyptus. Remember the Jewish or the Christian movement, the Jesus movement, was originally a Jewish movement.
Oh, I understand.
So this apocalypticism has its roots in Judaism, or the history of Judaism. Many of the texts that have been influential on Jews are actually not in the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians call the Old Testament, but there are a few passages in the Hebrew Bible that relate to apocalypticism. So,
well, no, God destroyed everyone except Noah and his family. Was that an apocalypse?
I don't think so, because in the Hebrew Bible you have something that scholars call the Deuteronomistic view of history, which is the idea that God has made a covenant with the Jews, and God makes certain promises, and Jews have certain obligations to follow God's commandments, and if they don't follow God's commandments, they will be punished here on earth. Now, I think the story of Noah, it's been a long time since I've read it, but they're not just talking about Jews, they're talking about human beings. The sinfulness of human
world
beings.
was so evil that he had to
Yes.
destroy every living person except
Right.
one family.
Right.
And
I think that story was composed before Jewish apocalypticism developed.
All right. Well, tell me about there have been lots of predictions of the final days, the end of time. How are there large? Did these people have large followings, and did other Christians, from the outset, just say that's this guy's full of baloney? How was all of that received?
Well, both ways. So not long ago, there was a man. I forget his name, but he had this organization called Family Radio. He was on he had a series of radio stations, and he had a website, and he was preaching the imminent end of the world based on his interpretations of the Bible. He was in his 90s, and I think my take on it is I think he wanted to see the second coming of Jesus before he died.
Yes,
And,
but he had some dates that he was working from.
He did have some dates. He had some dates. I took a look at his material briefly, and I couldn't, in terms of a logical way, I couldn't see how he was getting his dates. But nevertheless, he had some dates, and he had a significant following, and a number of people would gave their whole retirement funds to him for to put up those billboards that we saw.
I recall reading about all that.
Right, but and then I think he was very disappointed. He had a heart attack not long after that didn't materialize, and I think because of his health and his age, he never sufficiently reinterpreted. But most prophets, Well, he would not say he was, I don't think he would have said he was a prophet. He was an interpreter of the Bible.
Yes.
But most prophets, a prophet is someone who claims that they're receiving information from God or some
Yes.
other unseen sort of being. Most prophets would, when their prophecy fails, they usually reinterpret. And, some followers will find it.
It was a
persuasive.
miscalculation.
Yeah.
Well, as I recall this event you were referring to, that on that day, the righteous people were going to just rise into heaven
Right.
with none of their earthly belongings, I
Right.
presume naked, and the rest of us were going to be left down here.
Right.
So our organization for that day went down to the levee opposite Jackson Square because we knew we were not going to go up.
You're not going to, yeah.
And we had balloons, and people there could put a message on it to send up to their friends who went up because we weren't going to be there with them.
Right, right.
So we made an event out of that, and then went into the French Quarter to a bar room and had a big party.
Well, and I think you weren't the only ones who had a party. Other people found humor in it. But in his predictions, he had a two-part scenario. One was the rapture, that the faithful would be lifted up into heaven and the rest of us would be left here behind. But then, so that was the first test of faith. He was expecting that they would all go up to heaven, and then that didn't happen. So then he did offer a reinterpretation that it was an invisible rapture, right?
Okay.
And that they knew who was saved, or that God, at least God knew who was going to be saved. But then the second part of the interpretation was that then the world would be destroyed. And then so when the second part did not come to pass, then that was a very serious matter for
All
him.
right, I'm looking at, this comes from your own website under your definition of premillennialism. I'm not reading it all, but it says here, at the end of the 1,000-year kingdom, after Christ comes another, at the end of the 1,000-year kingdom, the final judgment occurs. Sinners are cast into hell and creation is restored to perfection. The pre-millennium outlook is pessimistic about human nature and society.
Right.
Humans are so depraved that God must judge humanity and destroy the present creation in order to establish a purified humanity in creation. Now, as I read this, Christ must return and then another 1,000 years passes. Is that what I'm reading?
That's right.
Okay.
Now, that's
right
according
now
to
we
the-
are not that depraved. We're going to become very depraved.
Well, you just read the definition of premillennialism.
Yes.
And this is a term used by Christians and also scholars of the history of Christianity to refer to this scenario that we've been talking about, and it derives from the book of Revelation. But in my studies, as you read out all my areas of qualifications and
Yeah.
teaching interests, I do a lot of work on Asian religions, and I teach courses on world religions. So, it's very apparent that to those of us who work in other religious traditions, that you have the same religious patterns in non-Christian religious movements as well, or even secular religious movements, as I've already mentioned. And so, and Christians, when we're talking about Christianity strictly, they'll refer to premillennialism, which is the catastrophic variety, and then postmillennialism, which is what I described as the progressive variety. But I derive these categories that I call catastrophic millennialism and progressive millennialism because I want to engage in the cross-cultural study of these religious patterns.
All right. Now you teach history of religions, or you teach about all kinds of religion. Do some of them, in your view, have the inside track, and some of them are really going off in the wrong direction?
I wouldn't say any of them have the inside track, but because they're all, human beings make meaning, and I'm not aware of any human group that has the truth with a capital T, okay? I think the other part of your question is, are any of them going off the rails or causing problems? I become concerned. A number of millennial movements do a lot of good and have in a lot of ways, but some of them can become very violent. And so when they hold to their vision of their goal that they want to achieve, and they hold to it so strongly that they're willing to kill anybody who stands in their way, then that's obviously a very serious matter. And so there have been a number of violent millennial movements throughout history, and but some recent ones would be the Nazi movement in Germany. The German Nazis. That was a millennial movement.
Now tell me how that qualifies as a millennial.
Because they were striving to achieve a collective salvation for the German people. What they wanted to have a pure German race.
Yes.
This model, and certainly as we know the history there. I've already referred to secular Marxist revolutions as millennial movements, and there have been a lot of deaths there. In China, for instance, before the Maoist revolution, China produced quite a few I call them revolutionary millennial movements. Sometimes they're motivated by a Buddhist ideology, sometimes they're motivated by Taoist ideologies, and millions of people got killed. I think before the Maoist revolution, the more recent one in the 19th century was called the Taiping Revolution.
But even today, various religions are at war with other religions, and there's great concern about Islam becoming powerful and maybe attempting to destroy Judeo-Christian. Is all of that, do you see all of that?
Well, it relates, but in relation to Islam, of course, we have to be aware that there are different types of Muslims and different types of Muslim belief. And when you listen to the news, for instance, NPR, National Public Radio, you'll hear them, or you might read the term Islamist. Yes. And an Islamist is someone who wants to create a state that enforces the Sharia, the Islamic law. Uh-huh. Now, they might already live in a state that enforces the Sharia, like Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, but they want it enforced the way they want to see it. And so I hear we're coming to an end, but the jihadist movement is a revolutionary millennial movement, but it does not apply to all Muslims.
Cartherine, thank you for being here.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, folks, for being with us. See you again.